Welcome to TSAT. Today friends, I am going to discuss about a topic in science and technology regarding Indian energy scenario. So, this is an area which we need to have a clear-cut understanding how energy is being generated. So, what do you mean by energy? Energy can be a physical form or a chemical form which has got the capacity to generate power or electricity is known as energy. For example, to make you understand, physical form or a chemical form means, for example, take the case of a huge waterhead at the back of the dam. It exerts a lot of pressure, gravitational pressure is an energy, a gravitational potential energy. By the movement of the water, the gravitational potential energy converts into kinetic energy and then to power, is a physical form. Whereas in the case of chemical form, take the case of petroleum. In terms of thermal power, when you burn the petroleum, you can generate power through heat. So, one way here power is being generated through a physical form like moving water. The second way by burning petroleum or coal, releasing energy, heat energy, converting into power. So, we are using these different sources for generation of power. So, why this kind of scenario of power generation in India is essential. So, we have agreed upon certain conventions happened in Glasgow and in COP26 and about to happen in the COP27, the climate change conference which we are about to have. We are agreeing upon certain international conventions to deter the climate change phenomena in terms of global warming. So, one of the major reasons for global warming is burning of fossil fuels. India, after China, is one of the major country in the world which is releasing greenhouse gases. So, in this context, we need to transform the generation of power from fossil fuels to renewable sources and which are sustainable. So, in this context, we need to know the scenario in the case of India. What are the proportionate supply sources of energy responsible for generation of power? What is the existing scenario? How we need to transform to meet the international conventions which we have agreed upon. So, this is the discussion which I am going to make you right now with you. In this process, before getting into the content, we need to have a clarity here. So, because there is a content or a question in the syllabus being given where regarding renewable sources of energy. So, what is a renewable source of energy? In this context, we need to know not to get confused. We need to be clear with what is a conventional source, what is non-conventional source, what is a renewable source, what is non-renewable source, what is sustainable source. When we are clear with, I have given with certain examples what these sources are. Conventional here implies that whether it is renewable or non-renewable. When traditionally when a source is being used since age old, that source is being described as conventional. So, here for example, take the case of hydel power here, hydro is a renewable source but conventional. Fossil fuel, coal is an example of conventional but non-renewable. So, a conventional can be renewable or non-renewable. So, non-conventional means which is new is known as non-conventional. So, in this context, you have got solar power, wind, modern biofuels, tidal, wave and OTEC. So, in this context, in the case of conventional, the differentiation between traditional biofuels and modern biofuels. In the case of, as I have discussed with you in the previous sessions what biofuels are. Traditionally, we are using firewood, cow dung, etc. as a fuel. Traditionally, we are using this. But in modern terms, with the improvement of technology, these biofuels are being used in a different way by applying technology. For example, generation of alcohols, ethanol, propanol, butanol through the process of fermentation and biodiesels through the process of trans esterification. We are using biodiesels and biopetrol and biodiesel in this modern era derived from the contemporary living beings are considered as non-conventional. So, biofuels, the traditional biofuels and modern biofuels, we need to differentiate this. Renewable means which can be regenerated again. Those are known as renewable sources. For example, when you burn coal, after converting the coal into ash, we cannot, with the existing technology, we cannot make coal again from the ash. But in the case of hydro or solar or biofuels are considered, every morning the sun rises, so solar energy is available, so it is renewable and relatively compared with our lifespan. Biofuels are derived from the growing cultivated plants or crops. So, every year you can cultivate crops so that you can extract oils, diesels, alcohol, fermentation, etc. can be done. So, hydel power, every year it rains, the dams will be filled. So, something which can be regenerated again. The ocean thermal energy conversion is a renewable and a non-conventional. So, ocean thermal energy conversion I will be explaining you in the process is there is a certain kind of temperature gradient available in the ocean. The top ocean waters are warmer when relatively compared with the deeper ocean content. So, here in this case what happens is the temperature gradient is being used to run an engine which I will be discussing with you. OTEC is renewable source. Geothermal, even though it is negligible in India, it is a renewable source. Geothermal extraction of power through the heat generated from the lava and magma in the Earth's interior in the volcanic regions. Wind, tidal and wave. So, these are all renewable sources. So, when the wind turbine rotates due to the wind velocities can be used to generate power. Non-renewable means which cannot be regenerated again, the fossil fuels and nuclear. So, do not confuse here, nuclear is non-renewable. You may think that nuclear is renewable, nuclear is non-renewable, nuclear is conventional. Because the reason conventional means we are using it since age old, because we have started generating power, nuclear technology more than 5 decades, then no more it is non-conventional, nuclear technology is conventional. You need to make a note regarding this. And sustainable. So, sustainable here it can be renewable or non-renewable or whatever it is. Sustainability is one where which is preserving the environment with low pollution or no pollution is the main concerns in terms of energy is considered. So, whatever is being out of all this classification being done, sustainable is one where the pollution is very minimum and which can be where there is regeneration of essential energy required whenever required is sustainable. In this way, energy is being classified as sustainable. For example, hydel can be considered to an extent sustainable, but in the case of hydro has got place in non-conventional also, renewable also, conventional. It has got hydro can be classified in these three, but you need to use a word. Microhydel is sustainable, non-conventional. Microhydel power projects are non-conventional, means a microhydel power project is one which generates power less than 25 megawatts is considered as a microhydel power projects. Just make a note there. Microhydel power projects are considered non-conventional, whereas macro larger than 25 megawatts hydel power projects are considered as conventional. The reason behind it is the area of inundation behind the dam is so less that it is not impacting the biodiversity. But mega hydel power projects, the inundation area is so huge that leading to the loss of certain biodiversity. That is the reason why they are not considered as sustainable. So, for example, with the recent technology, a kind of penstocks have been developed. Penstocks are a kind of pipes into which water turbines have been placed inside. So, the a larger pipe is just immersed into the streams. So, streams form tributaries, tributaries combine to form the main river stream. So, in this case what happens is, when the river is being formed in the catchment area, so the main river is being formed by the merging of tributaries. So, the tributaries are being formed by the merging of streams. So, when the stream width is small, so when the stream width is narrow, you can place a pipe which can exactly fit into the stream, so that the water in the stream need to pass through this pipe known as penstock, which contains turbines which rotate due to the force of the water flowing. So, here there is no question of inundation at all. These are considered as sustainable non-conventional hydel power generation when relatively compared with mega hydel power generation. So, when you are describing here, you need to mention that micro hydel power projects are non-conventional, and hydro has got place even in case of renewable sources, and I have demarcated the line where micro and mega hydel power projects are being differentiated in terms of megawatt of power being generated, where micro is less than 25 megawatts. So, in the scenario is considered right now around 2020, 21, 22, there is a predominance of fossil fuel production, fossil fuels being used in power generation. So, this is not sustainable mode of power generation in the case of India. So, gradually what happens, our aim by 2050 is to reduce the dependence of fossil fuels to 20%, and our aim is to maximize the production of power through solar, wind and other renewable sources. The reason behind it is, when you are developing this kind of shift in terms of power generation from non-renewable to renewable, is this makes you self-reliant. You will be having energy security. You will be meeting the international conventions you have agreed upon in Glasgow or any other international conventions of climate change. These are the different advantages you have got, but it takes a long time till 2050 in this gradual conversion from the scenario of power generation in 2022 2050. This is the plan scenario which we have got in future, to gradually shift our power generation scenario, which is more fossil fuel based now, to a renewable source. So, in the projection being made given to you, one thing you can one thing is highlighted here is the potency in terms of solar power in the case of India is more, because we are living in a tropical country. So, the solar flux is more, that we must be able to utilize. The other factor is ocean thermal energy conversion is also a solar energy, which is because of the temperature gradient in the ocean. The advantage with India in terms of Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea is, when relatively compared with any other oceans, the Atlantic or the Pacific or the Southern Indian Ocean or any kind of ocean, has got a polar source of water, whether through the Bering Strait or through the southern Antarctica region, there is a source of polar waters which are cold, which may not provide a temperature gradient essential to generate power. But in the case of India, in the case of Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea, there is no polar cold water source. So, from these Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea, in future we will be able to generate power by using the temperature gradient. So, I will be explaining how it will be happening. That is one of the other source we have got in the case of India. It is under the process of experimentation, proved practically for the experimental purpose, but not to the economic level. So, this is the scenario which we need to understand here, the sector wise division, the sources through which power is being generated, which is not sustainable. So, hydel or nuclear, etc. So, the power is being generated by an instrument known as a dynamo. A dynamo is a device which converts mechanical energy into electrical energy. So, here in this context, a dynamo is a powerful horseshoe magnet. So, a coil copper solenoid, copper wound coil is being placed between these north pole and south pole. This is being made to rotate with the axis of a turbine. So, the turbine can be a steam turbine. The mechanical energy is being supplied to the dynamo by the turbine. It can be a windmill, it can be a steam turbine or a hydel turbine, which is transferring the mechanical energy to the dynamo. This rotating coil cuts the magnetic lines of forces. This cutting the magnetic lines of forces, when the coil is being rotated with the mechanical energy being supplied by the turbines, cuts the magnetic lines of forces rotating between north pole and south poles. These magnetic force attracts the electrons in the coil, leading to the flow of electrons, generating potential difference. So, this is a dynamo. So, in all the sources of commercial power generation, you require this structure, whether it is thermal, whether it is nuclear, or whether it is hydel. In every source you require this, even wind, you require this in structure, a device which converts mechanical energy into electrical energy, except in the case of solar photovoltaics. Solar photovoltaics generate power with the help of a principle known as photoelectric effect. So, it does not require a dynamo for commercial power generation. So, power sector at a glance. So, here when you are explaining the power scenario in the case of India, one thing which is more important to you is substantiating your explanation with a proof is much more essential. You will be appreciated and more marks will be awarded only when there is a proof need to be given which is current. So, in this context, a different scenario of data you need to have to present your idea in a different dynamic manner. For example, here the data being available here is the central sector, means the central government, the state government and the private sector. So, the power can be generated by the state government or the central government or a private sector. So, out of the total power being generated in our country, what are the different sectors which are responsible for generation of power. So, for example, in the case of central sector, this in terms of megawatts, 99,005 megawatts. So, in the case of state sector, 1,04,966 megawatts are being generated. So, this kind of sectoral division with the data presentation you must be able to do. So, people whom will be awarded more marks is when you are able to present this data between the paragraphs in a tabular form will be awarded more marks. So, your proof is much more essential, remember this. So, private sector is around 2,03,825 megawatts, the total is this. So, you can present sometimes if you are not able to present in terms of megawatts, if you are not able to give the data in this way, at least you must be able to present in terms of percentage. The central sector percentage is 24%, the state sector percentage is 25% and private sector is 50%. At least this kind of data presentation is essential in a tabular form to have an advantage over your competitor. Installed generation capacity, what is that we have got in this era? The fossil fuel. So, here the category is fossil fuel. So, scenario in terms of fossil fuels, non-fossil fuels, if you are able to differentiate, you will have better advantage. The percentage of power being generated with coal. So, the coal has got a major line share here, see this, it has got 50% in the case of coal. Lignite is negligible, gas is 6.1, diesel is negligible 0.1, total fossil fuel is 57.9%, almost all the dependence on fossil fuel is 60%, which is very bad scenario when relatively compared with the sustainable development or in terms of pollution or global warming. This is the scenario in India where we need to transform a lot to a renewable source which is sustainable. So, the previous one is percentage in terms of fossil fuels. So, here the scenario here in terms of non-fossil fuels. So, in the case of hydro, in the case of it is occupying around out of these non-fossil fuels, it is having got the major chunk 40%, 11.5%. In the case of hydro is considered is 11.5%. Here non-fossil fuels means for example nuclear is a non-fossil fuel. So, when hydro and non-fossil fuels rest of the non-fossil fuels with hydro is combined, it is 40%. Only hydro is considered, it is 11.5%. Wind, solar and other are renewable sources which are non-fossil fuels. So, what is a fossil fuel? A fossil fuel is one which is being derived from the fossils. What is a fossil? A fossil is a remnant of the extinct living organism which generates fuel with geological processes embedded deep in the earth's layer, is a fossil fuel. So, wind is not fossil fuel, the solar is not fossil fuel. So, when the non-fossil fuels are considered, this is the scenario. The wind, solar and other renewable resources occupy around 29%. So, this kind of scenario is required to understand. So, installed generation capacity, the category and the generation capacity in megawatts and the percentage. So, this data is also very much important here in the when you are explaining the scenario, the percentage variation, and in the kind of scenario you must be able to compare the changes happening since 3-4 years, how the variation is happening, we are moving positively or negatively. Positively means you must be able to shift your power generation towards sustainable mode and renewable mode. Negative means when you are shifting towards more fossil fuel mode, which is not renewable, is a negative area. So, healthy mode of power generation is shifting towards renewable and non-fossil fuel mode is the best renewable mode of power generation. So, let us examine here. In the case of this category, wind is occupying 10.2%, solar 14.9%, cogen, BM power cogen here. Cogen means cogeneration. So, cogeneration here implies that when you are burning coal is fossil fuel, or lignite or bituminous or anthracite or whatever it is, those are fossil fuels. So, here we can strengthen the generation of power or meet the load factor required when you do not have a sufficient amount of coal or when you have got certain biomass. So, for example, the leftover grass or hay, the dry grass left after the harvesting of rice or wheat, or the waste collected from the market, or the coconut coir, or any kind of biomass or a wood or a firewood is being burned with the coal together, supports the coal, supports the energy essential in the power generation, so that during the peak load what happens is the essential quality of power need to be maintained, can be done. So, cogeneration here implies that while the coal is being burned, you are adding certain biomass like grass which has been packed into blocks, compressed blocks of grass with machines are being loaded. The coconut coir, the dried coconut which has been waste after drinking the coconut water, etc. They have been crushed, dried and piled into this. Or for example, take the case of bagasse. Bagasse is the leftover pulp after extracting sugarcane juice in the sugarcane industry. The pulp can be directly pumped into the furnace to generate power in the captive power plants in the case of sugar industry. So, sugar industry has an advantage where they have got captive power plants. Captive power plants are independent power plants established by the industry itself, are known as captive power plants. Especially in the sugarcane industry, whenever you visit a sugarcane industry, you can observe that what is happening to the pulp after extracting juice. It will be pumped into the furnace directly after extracting the juice through a turbine immediately into the furnace, generating heat, burning, and is used to generate power through steam turbines. So, here this phenomena is known as cogeneration. This phenomena is known as cogeneration. So, waste to energy, the waste available in the market, small hydropower as I have discussed with you. So, the nuclear 1.7, the total non-fossil fuel. So, when you are able to differentiate the percentage of fossil fuel sector wise, non-fossil fuel sector wise, this will give you a kind of scenario, the way the power is being generated in our country and the significance why we need to shift from fossil fuel to non-fossil fuel. So, Electricity Act 2003 has been enacted and came into force from 15/6/2003. The objective is to introduce competition, protect the consumer's interest and provide power for all. So, what competition here is? Competition between producers. So, you have got different private players producing power. So, when you have got different players producing power, what happens is you don't have monopoly in the market. So, when only a couple of people or only a single individual or a company is producing power, it leads to monopoly and the demand increases and he can determine terms in terms of establishing the prices in the market. But when you have got different players producing power, because of the competition, the price rate can be controlled to an extent. That is one of the main aim of this act. And competition protect, so for consumers and to supply power to every citizen in our country is the main aim of this act. The act provided for national electricity policy, rural electrification, open access in transmission phase, open access in distribution, mandatory SERs, licenses for generation and distribution. So, these are all the kind of issues being brought by this Electricity Act 2003. So, in this case, you need to show the percentage trend in terms of growth of the power is considered. For example, in the case of 2021 and 2022, when you relatively compare with the previous years, the power generation, the growth rate is 9.8. So, you must be able to give the trend in terms of the growth rate of the power or whether there is decrease in the power. Only in 1 year, there is decreasing in the growth rate is not much and there is a decrease, a negative growth rate because of the pandemic. The growth rate of production is less because of the functioning of industries is not much. Apart from this pandemic year, see the kind of scenario here. Compare the year and the growth rate here. In between 2015 and 16, the growth rate is 5.69. So, this is a scenario and the trend in terms of the growth rate, the amount of megawatts of power being generated every year and the growth rate. So, gradually it is not only the amount of megawatts power being generated is increasing, you are able to observe a trend that the growth rate is also gradually increasing except during the corona period 2021. The rest of the years you are able to observe certain growth rate. So, this is one of the significant aspect of the reason for the negative growth rate you must be able to mention. So, the electricity generation target of thermal, hydro, nuclear and Bhutan import for the year 2022-23 was fixed as 1459 BU comprising of 1257 BU thermal. So, when you relatively compare here, your targets are gradually increasing. So, the Bhutan, so we have got the neighboring buffer country known as Bhutan. So, this Bhutan has got surplus amount of hydel power. So, because of which we buy power from Bhutan. So, the plant load factor, till current, the central, state and private. So, this is private. So, this is a scenario comparing between central and state. So, the current percentage in 22, the share of coal it is all in the current share. So, here the trend in the previous initial discussion I have shown you 2019-20 pie diagram. Now, this is 2022 pie diagram. So, you need to compare this percentage with the data which I have shown to you, so that you will be able to know the trends in terms of changing of power scenario production. Fossil fuel and non-fossil fuel I have discussed with you. see this here, a terawatt hour. So, the kind of Indian renewable electricity in terms of when we the same scenario when it is being projected in terms of a graph, how the renewable sources production is increasing in terms of hydro, wind, solar and biomass. So, in overall what the trend where you are able to observe here is there is a gradual increasing in renewable source of power generation, but still we need to reduce the dependence on fossil fuel. The disadvantage we have got with the fossil fuel is they are not renewable and they are responsible for a lot of pollution. Because of this reason, and we have agreed upon certain international conventions for climate change, we need to reduce the use of fossil fuels. So, friends, this is the trend which as far as energy power generation in India is considered. So, we shall meet in the next session discussing different topics in science and technology. Thank you.